And welcome to Straight Up. I am your host, Marc Patrone. Is Prime Minister Carney about to come home empty handed from his Asia summit? Well, we'll know for sure after he meets with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. But barring a last minute agreement with China, there is precious little to report in terms of concrete trade agreements with any of the Asian leaders that Carney met with over the last week. Contrast that with US President Trump's announcement of deals with and agreements with in principle with countries like Malaysia, Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam, and most importantly, China. Trump says there's been a major de-escalation in the trade dispute with that country.
Overall, I guess on the scale of from 0 to 10, with 10 being the best, I would say the meeting was a 12. Okay, I think it was a 12.
Now, Trump also made good on his promise not to talk with the Canadians about anything substantial during his Asian trip. Let's listen.
Anything on Canada? Anything on Canada?
We had a very nice conversation with him last night. We really did.
Thank you.
When he wasn't exchanging pleasantries with Mark Carney, Trump was making deals, and a lot of them, on the all-important issue of energy exports to China. Carney has been outflanked by Trump, who announced a, quote, very large-scale deal involving oil and gas from Alaska. He's also got commitments from the Chinese on critical minerals, soybeans, and curbing China's export of the chemical precursors used in the manufacturing of illegal fentanyl. Now, will Carney succeed in convincing China to drop its tariffs on Canadian canola products? We'll have to see. Is it possible that our elbows up trade strategy with the United States has deterred other countries from dealing with us for fear of backlash from the United States? I mean, consider what just happened in Japan, for instance. Prime Minister Carney was planning on a state visit to that country, but the Japanese bumped him. The excuse they gave at the time was it was just too close to the appointment of a new Chinese prime minister. But then the Japanese gave Trump a full state visit. There may be countries that see us mired in a bitter trade fight with the Americans and think they have to pick sides, and choosing access to the huge U.S. retail market over Canada is frankly a no-brainer. But I will pose that question, raise that issue with John Robson in our interview coming up shortly. And while Carney prepares to announce a climate competitiveness strategy, one of the world's highest profile climate change activists has done a stunning reversal. Billionaire Bill Gates now admits climate change is not an existential threat and that a lot of money has been wasted fighting it.
Climate is a super important problem. There's enough innovation here to avoid super bad outcomes. And as we go about trying to minimize that, we have to frame it in terms of overall human welfare, not just everything should be solely for climate. Wasn't the goal here to improve human lives?
Well, the Gates climb down may be seen as a signal to some that the radical environmentalists' hysterical push to win over hearts and minds has been lost. And joining me now is John Robson, who is a journalist, a historian, and a documentary filmmaker. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
I mean, it is interesting seeing Trump come back with a sack full of trade deals that he's announced with countries like Malaysia, for instance, but really the biggie is China. And those deals include soybeans, includes energy. These are the types of products that we wanted to sell to Chinese. So I would suggest that we kind of got outflanked by Trump in Asia, where he met with Xi Jinping. He got the deals he wanted. He's coming back. Now, what can we expect from Mark Carney? I mean, barring some last minute wheeling and dealing, unless he pulls something, a rabbit out of his hat, I don't see that he's going to have a whole lot to show for his trip out there. What do you think?
I think we could confidently expect verbiage. Mark Carney is extremely good at stringing together long abstractions into plausible grammatical constructions. But what we really need in Canada is to get our own house in order, right? First of all, internal free trade. We can and should get rid of interprovincial trade barriers. It would be a huge free money boost to our economy. We need to get rid of the rules and the taxes and the regulations, and more than anything else, I think the uncertainty that is inhibiting investment in Canada. I'm not a big fan of getting into bed with the communist Chinese. They're very dangerous, they're dishonest, they don't keep their promises. I think that a trade strategy based on China is foolishness. But I think that a trade strategy based on removing our own barriers, internal and external, and freeing up the energy and ingenuity and dynamism of our people is the no-brainer. But of course, the budget that we're going to get on November 4th, the austerity and investment budget, will frankly contain very little of either. There will be a lot of spending. There will be some of it will be labeled investment, but as Abraham Lincoln supposedly said, if you call a cow's tail its leg, it doesn't then have five legs. And much of the investment will be from the government, and they will continue to do things that scare away private investors. Mark Carney is all hat and no cattle. I can't believe people fall for his act. I mean, I know it worked at Davos for 20 years, and he became a very rich man, so I understand why he thinks he's saying something. But I can't understand why people reading what he says and going, there are no ideas in that cloud of words, think to themselves, oh, I guess wiser and better people than I know what he meant. I think I'll vote for him again.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk. If you go right back to the ads and the impact they had, and how Doug Ford came out and said, well, millions, tens of millions of people, billions of people have seen these ads. And I think that they have actually undermined our ability to get deals with other countries, countries not named the United States. Reason being, countries see the fight that we're having with the United States, and they don't necessarily want to kind of get mixed up in any of it. They might feel like, well, these two are really going at it. Maybe it's time for me to choose. Do I have to pick a side here? And if I'm going to pick a side, I'm going to pick the side in which has a huge market, not the one that has a puny one. So I'm making the case that I think that ad and just the ongoing belligerence between ourselves and the United States on trade is a turnoff for other countries with whom we would like to strike trade deals. What do you think? Is that a possibility?
I think it is. And I think the problem in large measure is that supposedly one of the reasons that Mark Carney ran as the adult in the room, right, by contrast with Justin Trudeau, who clearly never left his adolescence behind, but also Donald Trump, who frequently resembles a 6-year-old having a tantrum. But when you see Carney and Ford fighting over, well, you saw the ad before it was posted. Oh, I didn't see the ad. It was a great ad. It was a terrible ad. They get the impression that we too are governed by squabbling children. And we're also much smaller than the United States, and we have a less dynamic economy because we're overgoverned by squabbling children. And if they just said, look, this was a good ad. It made the point that Ronald Reagan favored free trade, and we feel that Americans ought to remember that because they think fondly of Ronald Reagan. And gone ahead with grown-up stuff and not taken Trump's tantrum too seriously. And also borne in mind that although Trump used the ad as the occasion, he was unhappy with Canadian government for a lot of other reasons, including this very childish decision to recognize the non-existent state of Palestine, or even Mark Carney running the elbows up election campaign. I'm going to go down to the United States and hit Donald Trump physically, beat him up like the old Broad Street bullies, which was a ludicrous claim in every imaginable dimension. And so I don't think the Americans think we're serious either. And again, I'm not saying Donald Trump is serious, except in the sense that, a heart attack is serious. Donald Trump is a frivolous and dangerous person. But he is the president of the United States. We have to live with that. Why don't we act like grown-ups? Why don't we bring in sensible policies? I mean, I know it sounds crazy, govern ourselves well and see if it helps us, but it just might work.
Yeah, the idea that we need to get into the mud, along with Trump and fight him, stand there like in a boxing ring, trade punches with somebody who's 10 times our size. Bad idea. And I'm reminded once again of all the countries that the United States levied tariffs on and how many of them actually pushed back with counter tariffs. I mean, besides us, it's the Chinese, right? That's it. All the other countries recognize this. No, we're not going to indulge in this back and forth because we know it's a losing proposition. We need to deal with the Americans. We need to get a deal with Trump. And so backlash, counter tariffs, elbows up doesn't work. And yet we went down that road. And I think it has blown up in our face big time. And I would go further to say that it's blown up not only in terms of our relationship with the United States, but potentially other trade partners,
Yeah,
because
and
it's
again, I
beginning.
have to emphasize that when a country puts tariffs and non-tariff barriers on imports, it hurts itself. It raises the price of goods for its own and services for its own people. And when they export, they get less for what they give up. So it's not a matter of, well, they hurt us, we'll hurt them back. Oh, we couldn't hurt them. We kicked them in the knee. They're 10 feet tall. It's a matter of they did something dumb to themselves, and we'll show them we'll do something dumb to ourselves. Unilateral free trade is the right policy. Never mind what fool thing other countries are doing, whether they're democratic allies like the United States or whether they are communist menaces like China. Just get rid of our own non tariff barriers and our tariffs. Get rid of supply management in agriculture. This is a plot to make the poor pay more for food in order to enrich a very small privileged class. And you can buy them out. I'm not saying rip them off, buy out the licenses. But we could get rid of agriculture marketing, and it's a huge irritant in trade too. Everybody else hates it. So we aren't doing the very, very basic stuff. And then we're like, gee, I wonder why being stupid isn't working. Well, I think the answer would be obvious if you weren't stupid.
I mean, Trump came out recently and said he's got a deal in principle with China on energy. I mean, China's been buying a lot of their oil and gas from Russia. And so if they're going to start buying from the Americans, I think that's a geopolitical win for the West, especially when you start to look at Ukraine and that whole situation. How was Russia paying for the war? Well, the only way they can, which is by selling oil to India and China and Europe. And so I think that was an interesting statement, but it was also interesting within the context of Canada kind of being left out in the cold a little bit. I mean, isn't it us who should be selling oil to the Chinese, and the rest of these Asian countries, and yet we're not in a position to do so. And unfortunately, uh, Carney's going to go into that meeting with Xi Jinping, and he's not going to have, like to your point earlier, all hat, no cattle. We don't have the pipelines. We don't have the infrastructure to ship that much oil to Asia. I mean, we now have the Trans-Canada, of course, to do that, but that's not enough. For us to really become a player on the world stage as an energy superpower, we need the infrastructure in place now, and we don't have it. And I think that really puts us behind the eight ball,
Yeah,
John.
yeah, and if you remember Justin Trudeau, when Europeans came here with suitcases full of cash saying, we want to buy your liquefied natural gas, and Trudeau's like, there is no business case for liquefied natural gas. And the correct response is like the umpire to the strikeout king who protested that the pitch wasn't a strike. How would you know? How would Justin Trudeau know if there's a business case for anything? But then you get Mark Carney and his vast billowing clouds of fog. Are you or are you not going to build a pipeline? Blah, 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 blah. And he talks on and on like Davos Man. And at the end of it, you're like, I have no idea whether he's going to try and build a pipeline. Nobody knows what he just said. I don't think he knows what he just said. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of helping China conquer the world, but at the same time, I am a big fan of selling our energy. And for that, partly we need to get over the idea that hydrocarbon energy, that natural gas, that oil, and even clean coal are killing the planet. And there we need some political courage and some political clarity, not again from the liberals. Mark Carney, of course, is a ferocious climate zealot who's also whatever you want at the moment, but not really in this and that and big long words, and then don't know where he stands. But I'd like to see the Conservative Party come out and say there is no scientific consensus that man-made CO2 is harming the planet, and we won't be bullied any further on this subject. And we are going to develop and sell our resources, and we will sell them to willing customers. Sell them to the United States. Never mind China. Sell them to the United States. Why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And as long as you're on the topic of climate zealots, let's talk about what just transpired with Bill Gates, of course, famous billionaire climate activist, a guy who famously proposed blocking out the sun in order to slow down the progress of, the earth destroying climate change threat. Now coming out and saying, well, you know what? Climate change is probably not going to lead to the end of the planet as we know it. It's still something that needs to be dealt with. But he has completely changed his tune. And people like Donald Trump are coming out and saying that proves that we won, our side won, in terms of the battle for hearts and minds. The side that pushed hyperventilating over climate change has just kind of thrown up his hand and said, this isn't working. We surrender. Is Trump right to make that determination based on what Bill Gates said?
Well, one Microsoft billionaire does not make a summer, but it's certainly encouraging. And again, you have to. Bill Gates is a very wealthy man because he made software that people wanted, and I'm a fan of Microsoft products. But he wasn't necessarily an expert on any number of other subjects that he weighed in on. But it's revealing. I remember there was recently somebody posted something online saying, "What thing that everybody is saying now will they all deny believing in 10 years?" And Matt Ridley replied that the weather is getting worse. And I can think of other things, but that's a good one that everybody right now who's anybody, and this has been true for 25 years, has had to be a fanatic on net zero. And they have had to say that they believe that there are more hurricanes and more wildfires and more this and more that, and we're all going to die. And suddenly the contagion kind of, the fever breaks, and everybody's like, what, who, did I say that? Was that me? And so I think you're going to see a lot of people backing off. And again, what Gates said also, there was a lot of good sense in his remark that there are other more serious problems that deserve our time and attention. And I want to claim that the climate discussion nexus is now vindicated, because of course we've been saying this for years, that all this attention to carbon pollution, which isn't even pollution, is taking attention away from other kinds of pollution. It's taking money, energy, idealism, and even rational thought away from dealing with things that really are killing people, like indoor smoke from cooking with dung and wood, that are killing people now in significant numbers in poor countries. The failure to clean up plastic pouring out of many Asian and African rivers into the oceans of the world and then washing back up on the beaches and so forth. I saw a thing, by the way, people were swimming in the Chicago River for the first time in almost a century because it has been cleaned up. That's what happens when we turn our attention to real pollution problems. And again, Bill Gates is thinking about disease in the world. If you want to spend trillions of dollars trying to get rid of carbon pollution so the temperature won't go up zero point 0.1 of a degree, which nobody would even notice anyway, or if you want to spend that money eradicating malaria, which is going to make more real difference in people's lives. And so I think there's, Jay Budgetchevsky once said that people are logical slowly. And I think that we're at the point where a lot of people are realizing that the predictions of calamity were not accurate, that the proposed remedies aren't going to work, that the cost is way too high and the benefits are way too low, and CO2 is not poison. And so they're going to sort of tiptoe like Bill Murray and Caddyshack, tiptoeing away from a situation they don't want anyone to know they were involved in. But I say, I don't want to make it hard and embarrassing for them. I say, great, glad they've seen the light. Come join us over here on the sane side, and hope Bill Gates is just at the head of a parade of other people. I mean, Greta Thunberg now has gone so crazy on Hamas that I'm not sure I want her on the stage. But there's lots of other people who've been really dyed in the wool climate fanatics. And if they were to stand up and say, I'd like to come on and do a webinar on CDN and explain why I now think I was wrong, I would welcome them with open arms. Do not make it hard for people to come back to the light, because that's where we need them.
Yeah, our government, though, doesn't seem to be going along with that moderating opinion that the Gates just, showed us. Because next week they're going to table this climate competitiveness policy. I guess maybe that'll probably be part of the budget or whatever. But they're going to talk about how Canada's going to become a major player on the world stage in terms of selling products that are, quote, decarbonized, including oil. I just, so they're not quitting at all. They're not backing away from any of this. And so I'm wondering what it'll take when you even have radical environmental opinions like the ones that Gates has expressed, being scaled back and rolled back. And our government appears hell-bent on continuing on with this lunacy. I mean, what's it going to take for these people to finally understand that the world has dropped it finally? We're done with the hyperventilating on climate change. And we're certainly done with throwing billions of dollars at a problem that doesn't really exist.
Yeah, I mean, again, I have to make an unkind comment borrowed from a British commentator about their own parliament, that most MPs are NPCs, which for non-gamers, that's non-player characters, these robotic entities with a very limited range of responses. the Liberal caucus would vote for a menu if it was put in front of them, and the boss said vote for this legislation. So all it would take for most of them is for the prime minister to say, okay, now we're going to do that instead, and they would all indignantly claim that it was what they'd always believed, and they were the best, and the Conservatives stink, and the NDP are maniacs, and so on, and blah blah blah. What it would take for Mark Carney to switch, I don't know, but luckily we do have elections. But again, I'm not satisfied with what people like Pierre Poliver or even Danielle Smith say about it. They're like, oh yeah, I agree with the science, but I don't agree with the policy. I think we should burn up the planet because it's kind of expensive not to. That's not a responsible or adult position to take either. I think what we need is for people to stand up and say there is no scientific consensus that there's a man-made climate crisis. In fact, there is very little scientific evidence for that state of affairs, and we should stop acting and as if there were. Mark Carney is a pretty flexible character, but he's also, he's cunning. When he's not telling you anything, he looks very sly. So for him to have a change of heart and change his mind, you'd have to have a bit more of both than I've ever noticed. But it's funny how when these things are so popular, like transgenderism, right? One day everybody's like, oh yeah, transgender. And the next day they're all going to say, I never said that. I never ever wanted men in women's prisons. So that must have been somebody who just looked like me. So, politics is downstream of culture. If the culture changes, the politicians will change. They are not, for the most part, leaders of any sort. And so what we need to do is speak up bravely, but, courteously, if we can manage it, and show them that the trend they were following is no longer a trend, and by golly, they'll stop following it just like that.
Unfortunately, they did get reelected,
Yeah, but
and
they can
people
still
thought,
change, right? The Liberal Party is notorious for being, what's that phrase, firm but flexible.
well, we'll have to see, because there's some talk that this budget coming out may not pass. I mean, even some liberals themselves, Steve McKinnon, House Leader, coming out and saying, well, we don't know for sure. The Tories are not going to support it. The Bloc isn't going to support it. And the NDP, they've supported them in the past relentlessly, but even apparently they are not convinced. So who knows? We could be in an election campaign. As bizarre as that sounds, and as unlikely as that sounds, it's not beyond the realm of possibility, John.
Yeah, and I'll say that, if MPs are not prepared to vote against a budget with whose contents they disagree, then they really are NPCs. I mean, like some of the liberals are saying, oh, you have to support the budget. It's like you got to vote with the PM, even though you're not in his party and don't think his ideas are any good. Well, what's the point of having a parliament in that case? MPs need to vote on the substance of what's in front of them and let the ballots fall where they may. If the Tories are really going to somehow manage to slip out of the room and let the budget pass because they don't think Canadians want an election in December or something like that, then they might as well not be in the room because they're absolutely useless. Get in there and vote your convictions. That's why we sent you there. Please stand up for what you believe in. Life is short. Make a difference while you can. And, so what's wrong with elections? I thought we liked self-government. I think it's preposterous that they'd be saying, oh, then there'd be an election.
Exactly.
That's how we do things in this country.
Exactly. John, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really
Always
do
a pleasure.
appreciate it. John Robson. And that is it for this edition of Straight Up. Hope you enjoyed it. Let's do it again real soon, shall we? Bye-bye for now.